you have to take a blind leap of faith to follow Jesus? Hey, I'm Matt, and for many of us, following Jesus has been presented that way, hasn't it? Because when we ask those fact-based questions about Jesus, we only got faith-based answers from people. We were told, well, you don't have enough faith, you just got to believe. And then we're like, yeah, but why do we believe? And they say, well, because the Bible says so, you know? The bad news is those are terrible answers you got, but the good news is they're actually factual answers to many of the questions that we ask. When Jesus and his first century followers talked about faith, they weren't referring to checking your intellect at the door and just blindly believing. No, when they talked about faith, they actually meant trust. And trust, this is important, trust is always based on evidence. So in this series, I want to show you just a little bit of the evidence for why you can trust the Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four independent eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life. Because if any one of them is true, well, that's all the evidence you need. So let's start with the first piece of evidence, okay? When you study first century history, the first thing that stands out to you is that four accounts of anything or anyone, well, that's a lot. Let me give you a little perspective. We have as many early sources about Jesus' life as we do about the life of Emperor Tiberius, the Roman emperor, during the time of Jesus' public ministry. And almost all those accounts of Emperor Tiberius' reign were written much later after his life than those of Jesus in his life. Speaking of these secular sources, we also have three of them at least, Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger, who each reference Jesus and some of the events surrounding his life. And all of these secular sources corroborate some of the accounts that we find in the Gospels. Now there's another piece of evidence to consider, and it's that these four Gospel accounts of Jesus' life, they were all based on eyewitness testimony. Matthew and John, well, they were both close disciples of Jesus who spent the 3 years of his public ministry with him. They were personally there for all the action. And then you have Mark, who is Peter's interpreter and traveling companion in Rome. So Peter, as you may know, was a disciple who spent 3 years with Jesus, and Mark is widely believed to have recorded his account from the eyewitness testimony of Peter, who probably wasn't able to write it down himself. And then you've got Luke, and I love Luke's account. This is an interesting account because he wasn't one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Luke was a medical doctor who traveled around with Paul. And Luke tells us at the beginning of his account that he did a thorough investigation of all the events of Jesus' life. He interviewed multiple eyewitnesses, and then he wrote his account. Now, as you might expect from a doctor, Luke is really factual, thorough, and very methodical. So all four of these accounts are not your typical biographies, if you will. They don't give equal time to all of Jesus' life. Each of them focus the majority of their time on the events of the week leading up to and then the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, which leads us back to this question, well, in a world and a time when writing was uncommon, when it was expensive, when it was very time-consuming, why do we have the four accounts of the life of a rabbi who lived in an obscure part of the world? And the only logical answer to that is because something extraordinary had to have happened. Something happened that was so remarkable that these people didn't want it to be lost to history. They felt compelled to document it so everybody could know. Now, what could that event be? Well, the resurrection of Jesus is the only explanation. Apart from a resurrection happening, there was no motivation, there was no reasoning to record the life of Jesus. I mean, after all, his teachings were not very popular. They weren't the kind that were going to spread. You know, love your enemies, pay taxes to the Romans. I mean, nobody wanted to hear that. He would have been, Jesus himself, would have been an insignificant figure who just claimed to be God, the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, but wasn't, you know. The Jews had a history of people like that rising up, you know, but then they'd watch them die and disappear. But the resurrection, well, that's what drove the desire of these men to record what happened. That's why we have as many accounts of Jesus' life as we do of Emperor Tiberius. But that leads us to the question, well, can we trust what they said about Jesus, including his resurrection? So in session 2, I'll give you some reasons why you can.